Welcome to a journey through the mysterious world of witches. This playlist explores the rich history of witchcraft from ancient myths and legends to the infamous witch hunts and modern spiritual practices. Discover the stories, ritual, and enduring influence of witches throughout the ages. Light a candle and dive into the enchanting and often misunderstood history of witches. The shocking tale of the first Bedfordshire witches sentenced to death. From the 15th to the 18th century, witch trials were an acceptable act in the UK. If a town or village suspected a woman, or sometimes a man, of being a witch, they would be put through a trial to see whether they were or not. The trials could be very cruel and painful, which usually led to the suspect dying. They were put through torture such as thumb screws and heated irons to try and get them to confess. Other methods like swimming, sleep deprivation, and sexual humiliation were also used. The number of people killed in the UK for being witches during this time is believed to be between 500 and 1,000. At least 90% of them were women. Those accused of witchcraft were usually women with bad reputations or certain looks. Warts, moles, or even insect bites were considered devil's mark by Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins and were enough to prove a woman was a witch. Those found guilty were suddenly sentenced to death, with burning, hanging, and beheading being the most common method of capital punishment. Witches in Bedfordshire. 2 Bedfordshire women were found guilty of being witches. Mary Sutton and her mother were hog tenders from Milton, according to Witches Apprehended. They were accused of tormenting a young boy to death, paralyzing a servant, and bewitching horses and cattle. The mother and daughter had a falling out with a local landowner, Master Edgar. After the argument, Edgar found his horses and livestock acting in a very unusual manner. The animals were cannibalizing or drowning themselves, which Edgar and local villagers believe was caused by witchcraft, and the Suttons got the blame. The division between the Suttons and Edgar grew when one of Mary's sons was struck by a servant of Edgar's for throwing stones. Not long after, the same servant was injured while he was working. He was stung by a beetle and reportedly fell into a trance and was paralyzed. While in bed, Mary reportedly visited the servant and suggested he could be cured by sharing his bed with her. When he was able to speak again, the servant told his story to Edgar, who went to find Mary. After she would not come willingly, Edgar dragged Mary from her home and took her to the servant. Apparently, after drawing her blood, he got better. The troubles continued when Edgar's son got involved. He is said to have thrown stones at Mary's mother and called her a witch. Soon after, he fell ill and died. The death of his son led Edgar to trial Mary and her mother for witchcraft by having them swum. Mary was tied with her hands to opposite feet and thrown into the mill dam. The belief was that if a woman sunk, she was innocent. But if she floated, she was indeed a witch. Mary floated. It was repeated, but once again, she would not sink. Despite continuing to say she was innocent, Mary's son actually spoke against her and his grandmother, claiming he had heard them plotting revenge against Edgar. Mary also later broke down and confessed. Mary and her mother were sentenced to death and hung on April 7th, 1612. The Sutton women's trial is one that is noted as it is the first recorded example of water being used in witch trials in England. Trials and executions of witches continued in England until the year 1735 with the new law of witchcraft, which made it a crime for a person to claim that any human being was guilty of practicing witchcraft. However, accusations did still continue. Thank you for tuning into this history of witches. Until next time, stay tuned for more interesting history. This was Sandra Pink.